Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Super Bowl Sunday. This is probably not, if you have tuned into this by mistake, you're wondering where are the ball players. Well, I'm recording the game myself, and if you want to record this show, you could do that and watch the game, but I think you'd have more fun watching it live because this is very much related to the book that I'm reading called Offbeat, Collaborating with Kerouac. And to move the lighting slightly, this is a homemade job. It's a joy. If it weren't for our producer, Pamela Dickerson, and who thought of doing this program, Anthony Demarbiex, the wonderful technical wizard who's also a composer and a musician and actor himself, as Pamela was an actress in films, and still is, and a filmmaker. And, of course, every week, James Canary, the dream person to collaborate with, who has taken Jack Kerouac's scroll for On the Road, and instead of visiting it in a vault once every 2 years to spray it, he takes it all around the world so everybody in the world can see how someone sat in a room in 3 weeks out of work with a typewriter and changed the world. And we have the wonderful Norton Wisdom, a spontaneous artist who makes incredible drawings and paintings on the spot during the whole program based on what's happening at the moment. And our very, very special guest, whom you'll hear from later on, the great Chris Felver, an extraordinary filmmaker, documentary photographer, a former golf pro, and an amazing person who's so much fun to be with. And when he takes your picture or films you, everybody's having such a good time. They don't get stage fright because they forget he's there and have fun. So we're going to begin where we left off last week, which was the part of the book after Kerouac had passed away. The book is called Offbeat, Collaborating with Kerouac. And this is the part after we left. I'll read just the last end of what we did with Ron Whitehead, who's an old friend of Chris's. We were together in the Netherlands, and telling him about the Insomniac-a-thon, and then going back to Louisville, from Louisville, back to New York, and hanging out with Jack. I said finally to them, that's what all the Insomniac-a-thon is all about. Meeting that need and creating a loving space and a happy home for that spirit, keeping it down home and for real, in spite of Jack. And the next chapter, for those of you who have the book on page 236, is called Jack in Northport, Off the Beaten Track. In July of 2001, it was a banner day for Jack Kerouac and his novel Big Sur. A poet, journalist, historian, and visionary, George Wallace had the idea of a multi-city marathon readings of Big Sur, all to occur on the same day. George Wallace was a native of Long Island and the curator of the Northport Historical Society. A year earlier, on July 9th, 2000, he had organized a tribute to Jack Kerouac and the happy years Jack had spent in Northport. Jack's old drinking buddy, the prolific and highly respected visual artist Stanley Twardowitz, spoke to an enthusiastic audience of young people about what it was like knowing Jack as a friend as well as a great writer. An old friend and neighbor described endless hours spent with Jack in Northport and how Jack was constantly trying to deal with the chaos of unwanted stardom and the sense of betrayal he felt from some of his old friends. Smith and other residents of Northport who had been Jack's friends reminisced about the Northport years. They spoke of Jack as a person, not as a celebrity. Jack's old drinking buddy, Stanley, listened patiently as my daughter Adira, then 19 years old, read selections of Jack's work with a trio of musicians, drummer Kevin Twigg, bassist John DeWitt, and myself. We accompanied Adira's readings from 5 of the timeless passages from On the Road that Jack and I used to do all the time at loft parties, park benches, coffee houses, Lucian Carr's apartment, and 4 a.m. impromptu, unsolicited, and often unappreciated, spontaneous commotion, making sessions at the end of a party that would often either quiet the remaining guests or force them to leave. We never did it except when the Spirit moved us. Before On the Road was published in 1956, and for years after that, we did after our doing our last formal public performance in 1958 at Brooklyn College. We never performed again publicly. In Northport, we did it just for fun. Now it felt like the words would fill the room. You could feel the audience sensing Jack's presence, hearing the music of his prose read aloud, accompanied by music that complemented the images and the characters he described in his unique and poetic style. Adira read with grace and dignity and humor, and I felt it would have been made Jack proud of her as she made me proud to be her father. Adira and many of her friends I met through her and my old two other kids, Alana and Adam, were part of a new generation that related to Jack's work in a fresh and personal way. They did not associate him in any way with the TV show Dobie Gill's character, Maynard G. Krabs. They did not wear berets, dark glasses with no rims, paste-on goatees, and they did not restrict their conversations to crazy man, you dig? They also sensed that none of us had done so either. For one thing, they read Jack's books and based their impressions on what our era was like from reading the works of Kerouac. The author, just as the young musicians among them now, saw Charlie Parker, Monk, Dizzy Gillespie, Miles, and Bud Powell as extraordinary musicians who chose now what it was and read and played each note as exquisitely as Jack chose each word. I shared reminiscences with the audience, as Stanley Twardowitz had done, about the whole artistic atmosphere of the 1950s and what it was like to be part of it, and what Jack and many of us had done together during those years. Our trio also played music that Jack and I were mutually interested in, classics of jazz, my own compositions, Native American, Latin American, French Canadian, African, and Irish folk music, all of which is now collectively labeled today world music. 36 years after Jack had moved to Northport, many in the residents from the town and surrounding communities were finding out for the first time that Jack had lived there for 6 years. They also learned some of his most important work was done in this small hamlet that reminded him so much of Lowell, Massachusetts, his old hometown. The exhibition featured photographs, letters, and articles that were assembled with care and taste. Walking through the museum enabled you to get an authentic pictorial retrospective of Jack's life in Northport. Reading the letters and seeing the photographs was like a college that summed up the period of transition from the end of the 50s to the early 60s. We were informed a few months later that there had never been so many young people visiting the museum as during the run of this particular show. Our opening day presentation was videoed by Metro Channel, a subsidiary of PBS National Television Network. It was scheduled to be run for a few performances for the week. It ran for several months throughout New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Another undocumented chapter in Jack's life was being reported. This chapter was being written by primary sources, people from all walks of life who'd known Jack, and the story was enhanced by others whose lives had been touched in some way by his work as an artist. Our 2000 opening day presentation was such a joyous event, no one wanted to leave or have it end. After our last musical selection, I thanked the audience on behalf of so many of our generation who were no longer here. I also publicly thanked George Wallace and his devoted staff I told George Wallace and the audience that what Jack had told me when he decided to buy a house with the money he'd received from on the road and moved to Northport. Davy, this town reminds me of Lowell. We'll have a home. My mother will never have to work in a factory again in her life. The success and interest generated by the 2000 exhibition gave George Wallace the idea of having a marathon reading of Big Sur in 2001. I put him in touch with Marty Cummins, who was one of the founders of the Kerouac Writers' Residence in Orlando, Florida. The members of the board in Orlando were enthusiastic and assembled a group of readers. I also put him in touch with John Sampas, Jack's brother-in-law, and the executor of Jack's estate. I told George about Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, the annual weekend festival each October where people come from all over the world for workshops, readings, tours of Lowell and Nashua, New Hampshire. Non-stop events done in a soulful, down-home way that reflects Jack's egalitarian, unpretentious, inclusive nature. The organizers of Lowell Celebrates Kerouac also joined forces to present a simultaneous reading of Big Sur in the towns of Northport and Orlando. George contacted poets he knew in San Francisco, and they joined us as well. I wrote Carolyn Cassidy in England, and she and her son John, now living in California, both agreed to come to Northport. Carolyn and I were honorary co-chairs of the event, and I was invited by the Huntington Arts Society to give a From Cairo to Kerouac concert with my quartet in the evening of July 22nd, 2001, following our 7-hour reading of Big Sur. For the Northport reading, George asked about poets, authors, actors, painters, and people from all professions to each read a chapter. The readers included Carolyn Cassidy and her son John Cassidy, the keeper of the flame of his father Neil's legacy. Adira Amram and I both read actors John Ventimiglia read from of The Sopranos, who had also played Kerouac in Joyce Johnson's play Doors Wide Open, and Tony Torn, who directed and acted in Joyce's play, both read brilliantly. Artist-poet China Blue, poet Casey Sear, and Susan Bennett gave lyrical readings. Poet-actor George Dickerson, known for his role in Blue Velvet, gave a spellbinding reading. Building contractor and master carpenter Jason Eisenberg, the foremost interpreter of Lord Buckley, gave a joyous performance. George Wallace and the host of Long Island Poets read with skill and grace. Poets Paul McDonald and Charles Newman also came all the way from Louisville, Kentucky, where we were last week in the reading, and they brought the lyrical sounds of the South, reading with skill and passion. Northport poet Kate Kelly brought sparkle and youthful energy to the event, and actors Michelle Esrick and Peter Garrity used their masterful theatrical skills to bring Jack's work to life. Drummer Kevin Twigg and bassist John DeWitt and I played for the entire 7 hours, except during an hour when I had to drive like a maniac to nearby Huntington, a few miles away, set up all my instruments at the Harry Chapin Rainbow Stage, play there, and then race back to Newport to play for a belly dancer who was also a classical concert pianist. Her name was Zoe Artemis, world poet traveler, and she also did belly dancing earlier before the readings. I then raced back to Huntington and arrived at the stage at 8:27 p.m., 3 minutes before our Heckscher Park free concert was about to begin. There were 3,000 people in the audience waiting to hear our quartet. "Wow, Maestro, I'm glad you showed up for the gig," said saxophonist Jerry Dodgian. Now that we're finally drawing audiences that outnumber the band, we could enjoy being overnight successes for the 300th time. I was tired after a 7-hour reading, but my mind was stimulated by creating new music on the spot for each of Kerouac's chapters of Big Sur. Now it was time to play our 3-hour concert. I got that rush of spirit energy I used to get when I collaborated with Jack. After we played for 40 minutes, we presented 5 short readings from On the Road. Our readers were Carolyn Cassidy, again her son John, my daughter Adira, John Ventimiglia, and George Wallace. Carolyn read in a way that got all 3,000 people to feel that they were in a room with her. Still gorgeous in her mid-70s, her elegance and grace filled the stage, and the young people in the front row sat in awe as she spoke about Jack and Neil and herself before reading her selected passage from On the Road. Carolyn needed no bombast, bluster, press agents, bodyguards, or interpreters to let everybody and anybody know who she was and what she was about. Her natural radiance was lifted by her presence as well as her performance. John read with his father's joyous energy and warmth. John's keen intelligence was like a medicine to all of us who spent most of our lives wading through the beatnik sleaze pit foisted upon our society by people who didn't have a clue about what we were doing back then and are still doing today. John Ventimiglia read the thrilling description of Jack and Neil going to hear George Shearing play. John Ventimiglia sounded so much like Jack that the audience stood up and cheered after his reading. Adira read one of the passages that Jack and I used to perform together before and after On the Road came out. I used to call it Children of the American Bop Night, and Jack liked that as an introductory title, even though it was the last line of the passage. It described the history of jazz and the generations of musicians and listeners. Adira's performance was mesmerizing. Her youthful exuberance, combined with her uncanny understanding of Jack's musical way of writing, was another milestone for her as a young performer. George Wallace then read the epic last 2 pages of On the Road with great feeling, savoring each word and creating enough space to allow the audience to feel that they were part of the congregation. Later that evening, as we sat around talking in George's house, Carolyn said, "I have so much correspondence from young people all over the world. They've read Off the Road, my book. They want to know about Jack and Neil as they really were. I try to answer them all and talk to them. I try to explain that Jack and Neil were almost Victorian in their manners and the way they behaved around me. They were really courtly. They were such gentlemen. What they did away from me was something else." Many of the people who have written about them have come to me and asked me to make corrections in case some of their information was inaccurate. I always give them all large amounts of corrections. When I read the books after they're published, all of the misinformation is still there, even when I'm acknowledged by the authors for helping them. They're simply making the most of it up. I can't understand it. I can, I said. If they don't get to primary sources from all walks of life and they don't read Jack's books carefully, how can they possibly understand what it was and what it is still all about? "I know," said Carolyn. "Jack wrote about Slim Galliard. He and Neil and I loved to go hear him. He was so brilliant. He spoke 17 languages. I saw him after years again in England. He knew so much and was a part of it all. Why didn't people interview him extensively or write a book about him? Why wasn't he or Dizzy Gillespie ever interviewed in depth about Jack? That's why I'm so happy that John Ventimiglia and my son John were both invited here. No one understands Neil either. They portray him as a semi-literate car thief and leave it at that. They don't seem interested in the intellectual stimulation he and Jack gave one another. It seemed that many of these literary people can't acknowledge or even comprehend how brilliant and well-read they both were. How we used to sit at home and recite Shakespeare plays at our house with the 3 of us playing all of the roles. Ah, that's so true, said John. And we had so much fun. For all his wild ways, Neil was such a great dad. He really loved his family. That's the part of the equation I found missing, I said. There's been a lot of grim, judgmental scowls and negativity when people write about us, but whatever our shortcomings, we were all in our own way purveyors of joy, energy, hope, and sharing. We didn't whine and put down others, but searched for moments of beauty. We dug every precious moment of life. I don't know, you and Jack did it what you did back then, said John, but I can feel it now when I read with you. You really listen. It's like you're talking back to me as I read, like a conversation. And tomorrow, when all this is over, you can go compose a symphony or a concerto with every note written out, or go the day after to one of these readings and conduct a symphony orchestra. It's all part of the same thing, I said. It's about opening your mind and opening your heart and listening. And spontaneity and formality, said Adira, chuckling. I've got your whole rap down, Daddy. Whenever you get off your soapbox, I have your 27-hour prepared statement to the world ready to be delivered. In that case, let's have one of our multilingual toasts to Jack and each other and get some new material, I said. Let's go play some music. George Wallace, John, Carolyn, Adira, and George's beautiful and gracious wife, Peg, went from the outside deck of his place into the living room, and I sat down at the piano. I made up a song with rhymes on the spot about when I worked as a carpenter's helper in Palo Alto and Los Gatos in the summer of 1948, so close to where the Cassidys lived, although I didn't know them at the time. I sang about how in the summer of 1948 I visited North Beach before it became a Mecca, and how all of us were there, and then bringing the then to the now for a new beginning in the town where Jack and the fabled Adolf the Clamor would both carouse till dawn, and what it was like to be hitchhiked back from Los Gatos in the summer of 1948. Then John joined me playing four-handed piano, and George sat down at the piano and played as well. Carolyn and Adira were giving us occasional encouraging comments or simply laughing. At 1 a.m., all time was suspended, and we could have been any place in the world in any year. As so many people have done since the beginning of time, we were sharing precious moments together, liberated from the tyranny of TVs, canasta, small talk, blasting radios and CD players, simply having fun and celebrating our friendship and memories of Jack. Good God, Amram, you've been playing for 10 hours already today when it started at 1:30. That was yesterday, said Jason Eisenberg. Even Lord Buckley took a break once in a while. Don't you ever get tired? All the time, I said, but getting tired shouldn't stop yourself from pursuing that great New Orleans philosophic principle of survival. Laissez les bons temps rouler. Let those good times roll. Let's let the good times roll, said Jason. Lord Buckley couldn't have said it better himself. I remember after your house burnt down and I came to help you work one day. We put in 12 hours nonstop. You're a severe taskmaster, but we sure had fun. That's so important, said Carolyn. The understanding that hard work in and out of the arts can also be joyful. We've got to show these kids that there's something more meaningful out there. This was so much a part of Jack and Neil's message. It's changing, David, said Jason. During the time that I've been involved in all this, I see the change. Since I live so near Lowell, I can see the change there. All of New England is now in the process of adopting Jack as their native son, the way they did with Robert Frost, the way they're starting to do with poet Robert Creeley. It's changing. The misconception that three people sat in a room and invented the Beat Generation is preposterous, and now it's no longer accepted because these kids are reading Jack's books or Joyce Johnson's books or Carolyn Cassidy's books, written by people who actually knew him. Atop the Underwood by Paul Marion, collections of the early writings of Jack Kerouac and Lowell shows that he would have been just as much a part of and just as great a writer even if he'd never come to New York. That's obvious. I've been saying that for years, I said. All of us who got to know him in New York were lucky. Everybody influences everybody, but Jack was the giant of his time. His main influence was Neal Cassady. On the Road wasn't written about wandering around New York City, and his many other influences that he held at the time were Baudelaire, Celine, Rimbaud, Thomas Wolfe, Walt Whitman, Langston Hughes, Herman Melville, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, John Dos Passos, Buddha, Carson McCullers, Bach, Slim Galliard, and an army of musicians, painters, poets, working people. We continued talking. None of us could bear the thought that this day had to end. I had a concert to play in 16 hours. Carolyn had to fly back to London. Jason had to drive back to New England for a construction job. Adira, Alana, and Adam all had to go home and go back to work. George and his wife hadn't slept in a week. We all agreed that the special spirit of this event gave back to us more than we could ever give to it. We felt fulfilled. The common spirit that we shared with Jack was enriching and almost overwhelming. Just another page or two, and then we're going to have our special guest come. Just the beginning of another chapter called New Millennium Blues, New Vistas, Final Thoughts, and Fond Farewells. As the 20th century tottered to a close amid reports of impending catastrophes due to global computer crashes, which fortunately never occurred, lists were made up of some of the 20th century BC, before computer achievements. Some of the milestones in the arts read like scorecards, compiled by lists of anonymous experts. These mysterious experts included the work that Jack and I had done together. Although no statuettes were presented, Pull My Daisy, the little film we made, was included as one of the best documentary short subjects of the country. I called up Alfred Leslie, who directed it, to congratulate him and left a message on Robert Franks, who'd filmed it on Robert's answering machine. And Lenny Gross, our old buddy, called me up. Amram, you've arrived. I told you in 1959 that you should give up everything and launch a film career. You could be another Arnold Schwarzenegger with more hair and less muscles. You could star in a new film being made about Genghis Khan. Go to the gym and get in shape. Get some headshots. You've arrived. You're an overnight cinematic success. Well, Lenny, I said, at least I don't have to ever feel guilty that I was overpaid for my non-performance of Pull My Daisy. I'm still waiting for my $58.28 from 1959. Well, you used to work in the post office, said Lenny. You know how much volume there is in mailrooms in New York. It's only 42 years ago. Don't be in a rush. I have a feeling that the check is in the mail. After this award, the next time Alfred and Robert have me in one of their films, I'm going to ask for a raise, I said. Now that we're among the century's best, it's time to move on up. Judging from your acting performance, Amram, I'd say you should be in demand for at least $5 an hour and be able to keep your costume, or at least have it dry cleaned after the filming. Congratulations, Bubula. Don't let cinematic success go to your head. Do you think the soundtrack with Jack's narration and your music will finally come out? All the bootleg copies sound terrible. I know, I said. Jack always tried to get them to put it out when he was still alive. Several companies are interested in doing it now. It should finally be out by the end of 2002. Actually, folks, it just came out 2 years ago. We talked for a while about the perception of Jack and his work, and it was finally changing. What you guys did that night in 1958 at Brooklyn College changed my life, said Letty. I always wanted to be a writer. I was serious even at 17, but I felt I couldn't possibly ever dare to try to be something I was brought up to know I could never be. After I heard your reading and hung out all night with you and Jack, I knew I could do it. You both made me feel I could do anything if I wanted to do it badly enough. I tried to tell that to Jack last time I visited him in Northport. I reminded him of how much that night meant to me. I could tell he felt uncomfortable being praised. He never wanted to be complimented. I know you love my books, Lenny, he said to me, so I know you love me. Now I've got some news for you, Amram. A dear friend of mine cut through the grapevine and heard that in a few days there'll be an announcement of the 100 best novels of the 20th century. On the Road will be one of them. Fantissimo, I said. Now I've got some news for you. There's going to be a listing of the best feature films of the 20th century, and The Manchurian Candidate, which I wrote the score for, is one of them. I'm not surprised, said Lenny. Your score was fantastic. I knew that when I met you in 1958, you'd become a one-man corporate entity. You're still an up-and-coming young composer. I want to go back and see that movie again. It was finally re-released a few years ago, and it's on video now, I said. Jack and composer Gil Evans were the only two people in the world who ever heard the entire soundtrack in its entirety. I sent them both reel-to-reel copies in 1963. Now, eventually, everybody can hear it, including all the parts that were cut out. That's great, Davy, but why did it take so long? Couldn't they speed things up a little? Why did they have to wait for Jack to die before they published Visions of Cody? Why did it take 40 years before a video VHS of Pull My Daisy came out? Before you answer me with one of your mega raps, I'm going to turn on my tape recorder and get your answer. You can transcribe it later for your book or for one of your presentations. Okay, man, it's turned on. Testing, testing. Now, tell me, Mr. Amram, why did it take 40 years for so much of what you've been involved with to surface? Same reason that Charlie Parker, Bartok, Jack himself, and so many others had to wait until they died, I said. Reason number one, most people are unaware of what's happening at the moment, and they're unable to accept the unfamiliar. As a result, we're always presented with repackaged versions of what was watered down from the original. Then eventually, the original gets discovered. Remember, number two, we're a necrophiliac culture. Dying is considered a brilliant career move. It's nuts. I tell kids, ride a bike, eat vegetables, think positive thoughts, count your blessings, enjoy each moment, live to be old. Longevity is the artist's best revenge. If you get bitter, you had it. If you get jealous of others who seem to have more than you for the moment, you're already ordering your own coffin. You've got to appreciate each other's work. Jack never put down another writer. When I boxed, you'd always hug your opponent after the fight was over. Often you became friends. Our competitive society is largely responsible for the outrageous level of alcoholism, drug abuse, failed marriages, dysfunctional families, and a pervasive sense of loneliness that I see in so many people's faces. I love this gorgeous country where we have so much and enjoy so little. We've forgotten how to love each other. Jack and I always supported each other in everything we did. We were our own floating 12-step program. Even though the term didn't exist back then, it was a spontaneous, day-to-day, homemade one that changed each day. It really meant more of the do-it-yourself survivalist style energy booster. It kept us fixed up and reminded us of who we were and never to give up. We were so concerned about trying to be real artists that we never thought about our health. We were also strong and determined and full of endless energy and ideas that we took it all for granted that we would live forever no matter what we did to ourselves. We were fighting for our moment in the sun, trying to break out of the prison we felt we were assigned to. We felt that even the most successful artists in America were in someone else's jail. No one ever suggested we should be battling alcoholism or drug addiction. That's one of the reasons so many of us succumbed to it. We didn't know back then that these were diseases. We were already rebelling against all of the negativity and hoped for a way out of our incarceration through what we did. We were battling selfishness, narcissism, greed, racism, and the self-loathing most of us were told we deserved. Today, if we were killing ourselves with drinking and drugging, friends would tell us to cool out immediately or get help. But we were stupid. We thought it was natural that so many of us faded away because of our own self-destruction. A lot of our generation was done in by the negativity that was like a dark cloud floating the triumph of World War II after that triumph. But some of us refused to give up and found ways to sidestep or ignore all that negativity. Instead of feeling sorry for ourselves, getting high 24 hours a day and spending our lives whining and blaming others, we worked even harder. We hung out with people who were searching out for what was beautiful and practical and practiced sharing love and compassion. Jack not only talked and wrote about this way of living his life, he practiced it. You know that, Lenny, because you know him. You knew him. You were with him. He was warm and open to everybody. He didn't play the game, and he paid a price. He was like Mickey Mantle, the great baseball player. His willpower and desire to achieve his goals was so strong that his body couldn't handle it. Just like Mickey Mantle, playing on bad knees, was always in pain. They both tried to kill their pain with drinking. Drinking back then was considered a virtue. The better you could hold your liquor, the more of a man you were. My kids in their generation know better. They know that getting juice doesn't kill the pain, it kills you. Jack and Mickey Mantle were both proud and compassionate people whose spirit demanded more than their bodies could handle. And they were both shy and modest, not cut out or trained to become public figures. Their achievements will always be part of our century's history. What a drag that they're not here to see how much people love and respect what they left for us. Jack would have loved to know that On the Road was chosen as one of the 100 best books of the century. If he were still alive and was interviewed by those who chose his novel to be honored, he would probably give a shy wave with his hand like a gesture of thanks and mutter, "Merci, mais ça suffit." Thank you so much, but that's enough. He would then tell the judges the names of 100 great writers whose books weren't chosen. And he would encourage the judges to read them. He would give the judges the names of the publishers of each book he felt that they should read. And if Jack had time to spend with any of the judges during the course of the evening, he would most likely suggest 1,000 or more books they should either discover or reread. Jack never compared himself to another writer, and he always tried to turn to you and the work of others. He would say, you can't tell and compare anyone gifted, anyone who's a sincere writer, to another writer, any more than you can compare Jesus to Buddha or Muhammad to Moses. You could compare my statistics when I was playing football of my teammates who were playing in the same position. You could compare me to my counterpart on my opponent's team. But in my writing, it's only what I write and who reads them that matters. I'm not in competition with other writers. I'm not in competition with myself. Each book is a song of its own, all part of one great Mahler-esque symphony. When I was out at sea, reading in my hammock and writing when all my shipmates were sleeping, no one was keeping score. As long as my critics can't make me stop writing, it doesn't really matter. They're like hitmen, paid to assassinate. As long as they don't kill my readers, I'll continue on my path. They may hurt my feelings, but they'll never kill my desire to write or my ability to do so, because that comes from God. They may dismiss me, but I won't ever dismiss myself. I'm an author, Davy. I'm a writer. I wonder if they even read my books all the way through before tearing them to shreds or ignoring them. Why are they so jealous? Can't they read? Why do they dismiss my work when so many readers love what I've written? Well, David, said Lenny, it's good to know you're still a man of few words. I'm going to get ready to go up to my place in Oneonta, New York, with the kids and bring in the new millennium, and then turn on my computer and see if cyberspace is still there. I'll see and talk to you in the next century. You know, Lenny, I said, we'll have 100 years to get everything cooled out that went wrong in the last 100 years. As Dizzy Gillespie used to say, we'll put some new ingredients into the pot. And next week, we'll talk about celebrating New Year's and beyond that. And our special guest will be the wonderful writer and journalist, Bob Keeling, who has a terrific series of books that he wrote. And his book about Kerouac in Florida is a classic. So now we're going to have, I think, a video, and then I will introduce our special guest, the fabulous photographer, filmmaker, bon vivant, storyteller, and I hope someday he could write a book. And if he did, I'll come to his book party, as I come to all his photographic book parties, and hang out till the very end, because he's just amazing. You're going to really enjoy him as much as all of us that have known him for so long enjoy him. And I wish my 3 kids were still living here, because they all give great impressions of the fabulous man about town, Sausalito's unofficial mayor and an ambassador of goodwill, photography, and everything that he touches, Mr. Chris Felver. It's just such a joy to have him here. Everyone in San Francisco has known him as a person who unofficially is the great documentarian of poets, musicians, artists, and everyday folks who have made San Francisco such an incredible town. And aside from the wonderful movie about the earthquake, his own movies even say more, because rather than talking about death and destruction, he celebrates joy and life in every single thing that he touches, everything that he does, and you're going to love his company. So now I would like to introduce a wonderful person who made it possible to do this show, and it's worth not watching the Super Bowl for me just to be able to be on with all of you tonight. And she's going to tell you about what we're going to see of Chris Felvers. Please welcome Ms. Pamela Dickerson and her brilliant associate and producer, Mr. Anthony Demarbiex.
Hello, everybody. Welcome, and welcome, Chris Felver. It's been so extraordinary looking at all of your work and hearing your friendship with David. Welcome. Anthony, are you there? We have, we're Super Bowl multitasking. And so once I'm on mic, there's actually a Super Bowl party going on in the other room. So I'm not going to ask them to be quiet. They're like, wow. Anthony.
Well, maybe we could do it when Anthony comes back and just continue, and then show it when he shows up again.
Hi, Anthony. We're ready for some intermission vids. Are you ready for us?
And accepting the award for Anthony, I'd like to say, since this is Zoom, which means everything that would seem to be a disaster turns into a plus. We have there we are.
A well-known poet who lived in San Francisco. He started the City Lights bookstore. He was a brave man and a brave poet.
Lawrence Ferlinghetti is a more complicated individual than we're used to having in American writing.
Poets, come out of your closets. Open your windows. Open your doors.
There was this communication back and forth between the poets and the visual artists.
Painters inspired poets and the poets inspired painters.
He opened up the doors for all of us to celebrate the rights of our First Amendment, the freedom of speech.
He has brought together one of the most amazing publishing houses in the world.
You know, this is a place where you sat down in a chair and you read a book.
Lawrence Ferlinghetti is an old-ass anarchist.
Ferlinghetti never romanticized people in power. He was always suspicious of it.
I salute thee, mass murderer by complicity.
Lawrence is probably the most popular modern poet
Text
in
Anthony.
the entire world.
I may have been swallowed, but I haven't been ingested. And I'm indigestible.
Hi, Anthony.
Ferlinghetti is still grappling and still speaking.
And that was part of Chris Felver's film, for those of you that didn't recognize it, because we didn't announce it. Now, Chris, that was your. Now we should mention the man who made the film, because he happens to be here. That is to say, on the Zoom call.
Love Lawrence Ferlinghetti.
So please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, the person who, that was just a fragment of his. He made 2 great films about Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and has an amazing bunch of other films, some of which I worked on, some of which I was in, and all of which I loved seeing because they're just so terrific. Mr. Chris Felver, the inexhaustible bearer of good cheer and creativity. Chris, are you still there? There you are.
Chris is there. We need you to unmic yourself, love, on the bottom left corner of whatever screen you're on.
How is that? Better?
Oh, excellent.
Excellent. Welcome.
Oh, marvelous, marvelous. Well, it's wonderful to be here, David. To hear you read is so fantastic. You know, all those events that we've lived through with you is so beautiful to relive them. So I'm really glad to be here tonight. And really, the one thing I so loved you saying was each book is a song of its own. And I really love that, because each little project that we do is a song of its own. So it's really great. But it's really great to see. I see all these, my friends up here, Ron and Robert and Norton, and it's fantastic. Really, really wonderful. So anyway, yes, I'm here.
And Chris, one of the wonderful things with knowing you all these 40 years is that every time, not just my own kids, but anybody, not only people older, I don't think anybody's older than me except for Lawrence, I'm 90 now, but even people who are, let's say, over driving age, you're still great with anybody from 12 years old up to 100. And that's a wonderful quality that I think we forget about. And also people assume that the Beach Generation was 5 sour people that were persecuted and unappreciated and angry. And that's fine. I mean, for those people who want to teach literature that way, a lot of luck, which means why so many people read comic books or don't read books. But the amazing thing being with you was I noticed that people loved what you were saying, and they got interested in photography, in filmmaking, and everything that you did. And more than that, some of them felt that they could be creative because you purvey that by being that way and encourage you. And that's real important. I know it's nothing you think about. It's just the way you are. But that's a very admirable thing.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, David, Admiral, but I will say one thing, that you have encouraged these kind of ideas for a long period of time. After all, we've known each other lo these many years, as Lawrence would say. But yeah, of course, I never met someone I didn't like, I mean, in most cases, and everyone looks beautiful to me. It's, in a certain sense, everyone is beautiful. And that's, I don't know whose ideas those are. I mean, I don't think it's a Catholic idea or any denomination, but I think that if you look at humanity, it's a gorgeous situation that we're involved in, it's evolving every day.
That's what I think about San Francisco. Everybody whines and complains, but still so beautiful. And every time I speak to Pamela, she has that great San Francisco bridge behind her, which is on her machine, not in her real life when she's living in Los Angeles. But I think about that and how gorgeous that is. And I remember looking at your tiny place in Sausalito and seeing that bridge and saying, wow. And there's a spirit there. The earthquake couldn't destroy it. The hedge fund operators can't destroy it. And when all those people are in jail or retired or move to exploit the next place, it's still going to be beautiful.
Well, what we have now is a very interesting situation there. We have a camp of tents for anyone who wants to come to Sausalito to be there. They can find a home on the water next to where the cop shop used to be before they formalized the cop shop down in town. So I think it's rather interesting what's happening, not just here, but everywhere in America. It's now an interesting situation, isn't it?
Well, as long as you got your sleeping bag, I'll always be out there, no matter how high the rents are. Because you have to remember, ever since Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, men and women have been fighting with each other, and the rents have been too high. But we still find a way to have romance and a good time.
Well, maybe we should segue with that to the indigenous. We have an indigenous, the work of Chris Felvers. Anthony, would you play that for us, please? Because if you go back to the origins of how people were together, I think in the indigenous times that it was a little different.
Well, David introduced me to a few people, and
so
Lloyd Red Crow Westerman was really very instrumental in my getting into the Native American situation, and it was a whole new world, and I really, profited not monetarily, but thought-wise in a much grouper situation. Whoops, what's this?
This is going to be, ooh.
Who knows what's
we're going to go to your natives, to American Indians.
Well, it's always spontaneous,
Amazing.
We're super spontaneous here.
Yeah, these are beautiful pictures. Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. Yeah. These are not pictures in the book. These pictures were made in Connecticut at a powwow with Doug Brinkley in 1994 in traditional outfits. And they're almost all made in one night. They really, it was a very, very wild evening, shall we say the least. But I had never seen anything quite like this before. And it led me to pursue that idea, and for a couple of years, I made pictures and put together poems and that represented the Native tradition across America, Oklahoma, Arizona, North Carolina, New York. And but these are representatives of a powwow in Connecticut in 1994. So
what was it like being at a powwow?
A lot of fun. I mean, well, the music was so terrific, and meeting all these wonderful people that actually had an awful lot of tradition that I wasn't that familiar with at the time, So it's sort of it's able to accept the unfamiliar. That's what David brought up before, and I think that's exactly what it's about, and that's what my photography is about. I'm trying to learn things about this world that I don't know about, and that's how I approach it. So David's been a wonderful teacher about all this, and we've all garnered a lot of information and a lot of joy and a lot of presence from David's what he's given us all. And I really, David, it's wonderful to have a chance to say something about that, all these years. So,
well, really, Chris, I'm just sharing it. There's all stuff I didn't know anything about either, because I don't think any of us, especially my age, being brought up reading comic books, really knew much about anything. And going to the movies and seeing Tarzan, didn't have any idea where Africa was. We thought that South America was anything south of New Jersey, with Carmen Miranda wearing a big thing of fruit over her head while Xavier Cugat was honking away, not playing his great music, this hip music that he could play, but playing the garbage that was thrust upon him by being told what I've been told all my life, which is quite a long time. That kids love it. Or that's not what the people want. Or it don't sound like movie music. Or art, literature, poetry, painting, theater are dead. So basically, the garbage man has a very, very important job to take the garbage, and they get paid well for doing really hard work, and they stop us all from being eaten by rats if we live in an urban situation, and we're lucky enough to be in a neighborhood where they pick up the garbage. However, so much of what we have in our culture is so beautiful and so nutritious, and what we throw away is not only great fertilizer, it's very often can turn into something very beautiful, and everything that you can appreciate, you have to learn from other people who are not brainwashed and who realize that every single person on earth has a heritage and a culture and something and a spirituality and a way of praying and speaking and walking and talking as an individual. And the only thing we have in common, most of us are assigned to being a certain group, is being dumped on. We all share that, whatever community the word used for subhuman means you're supposed to come from, is only shared when you're in an oppressed situation. So if you don't despise yourself and you can appreciate your own family and your mother and your grandmother and your heritage, then you can appreciate everybody else. And people who have a culture that's been dumped upon or made invisible will share it with you if they can see that you're not trying to be them, but you're trying to learn how to be you as a member of the human species. It's not that complicated. And the Native American people, of course, as Joanne Shenandoah said so beautifully, after a big rhetoric took place, she said, "We're still here." And that's pretty heavy.
Oh yeah, that's the main theme of understanding the Native American situation, is they're still here and they're very present. And I'm glad to see that they're finally getting some recognition. I mean, I'm so glad to see Joey Harjo get her third year as the poet laureate. And she's a wonderful, wonderful person to represent America. And I don't know, I always thought, my mom always told me, you got friends out there you haven't met yet. So I've always had that philosophy about there's a joy in meeting people, and that's what has taken my life over, and it's worked out, and I want to continue doing it. I'm just not, I start out as a sportsman, but I find that there's a lot more to it than that. And meeting great people is really, there's a very big reward in that, because you learn so much. And David, it's again another thing, one man's corporate entity. That's what it is. That's what it is.
Well, it's funny because if you could buy happiness, buy enlightenment, buy love, boy, everybody that had a lot of money would be deliriously happy. And I'd be glad to commit a crime if I could get enough money to buy some of that fine stuff. But that's not for sale. It's already there. It's already a gift for us to partake in. So when you realize that, then you could think differently. And that also makes you understand the other side of the coin, which is there's no good artist like a dead artist, which means you're supposed to willingly accept being a victim, not getting paid, being an independent, infantile, whining, stoned out personality, because that's all you deserve. And when you realize that it's not that way, then you don't acquiesce to being in that role either. You just figure, well, you're going to somehow survive and just keep following that road and hope you can find something good along the way. And if you get any blessings, share them with other people. And as they say in the South, keep on trucking. And that's not that complicated. In fact, most people are that way. When you go to different countries where you see people have 1/10 of what we do, and they don't have that worried look in their face and that staring over, and don't ever look you in the eye. They're always worried about something else because they're not doing well enough, or am I with a loser, therefore I'm a loser. When you can get over that, it's a whole different picture. It's all right there in front of us. It surrounds us. We just have to learn to pay attention. And man, that's hard, because then you have to overcome all your miseducation and avoid being what they call an overeducated fool, and try to be around people who keep it for real. And a lot of people do, and you're one of them. Jack always did. That's why his books are so appreciated, because he didn't get into that, I'm going to be a great writer, and now I'm going to be the toast of the literary world by giving a bad imitation of a 19th century Edwardian gentleman and wear a tweed coat with patches on my sleeves, smoke a pipe, and go to a psychiatrist. He was just the same guy from Lowell that loved writing, and he was put down and persecuted for that. One person came to a party, and they said, that guy's so great, why is he talking to me? So I realized sometimes you can't win. And sometimes you have to say, well, it's been a pleasure, but adios.
Avec plaisir, monsieur. You know, one time I actually took a photography course at Sun Valley Center in like 76. I was recovering from something. I was reading Kerouac. I was just recovering from this when I met Neil. It was interesting. Anyway, I met Walter Nottingham, and Walter Nottingham was like the great fibrist artist out of, I think it was out of Indiana. I'm not exactly sure, but Walter Nottingham was there, and he had the great line, do not harden the categories. And I thought, well, that's one of the great lines. I'll never forget that. And I haven't. That's why I'm saying it tonight. But, you know, that's what it's all about, right? You can't get into everybody's unique. That's what the art system runs, you know. So
well, I'll tell you one thing I learned from you, Chris. When we were in Paris at the Shakespeare's book's 50th anniversary, after we had both been together at the Lawrence Ferlinghetti's City Lights 50th anniversary, we went over there, and you were dressed up, I remember, sort of like a sailor suit with a hat, and I was struggling all my life to speak French better, and you walked in, and your version of French, to ingratiate yourself with the les gens français, was not to sound like an expert on Racine, but to say, bonsoir, what's lows you all, get me a drink. And everybody loved you. And I realized it wasn't necessary just to speak the language or pretend to impersonate someone else, but just to be yourself, and the people could sense that. And there you were in a culture where they treasure their language more than we can ever imagine. And your Voss's Lows, get me a drink, you all. They bought us all drinks. They were just so thrilled to be with you because they felt your spirit that had nothing to do with what it would have been like if you were pretending to be Winston Churchill or Charles Boyer.
I'd have a little trouble being those two people, but I have trouble being anything other than Felver, you know. But I don't know. It's all about perspective, right? And how you see people, and if you see people in a joyous fashion, it's one thing. But like you said, if it's all like critical, it's no fun. And Cecil Taylor always said, as you well know, it's got to be fun. And he's told me that like 40 times, and I put it a couple times in the film. But, you know, this is like a Robert Creeley poem that it was about, if it isn't fun, don't do it. You'll have enough to do that isn't. Like they say, no one gets away without paying. And since you don't get to keep it anyhow, who needs it? And I always thought, well, that's a very serious young poem, you know, but Robert was something, you know, Dean of American Poets, obviously. But then there was a thing, this young man, fun comes easy, pleasure takes a lifetime. And I thought, well, that's Stavisky. That's the German playwright. I thought, well, that's really hip. So when I saw Cecil go into the fun bit, I thought, yes, this is how you sort of have to look at it. You certainly can't struggle and suffer and all this stuff. It's just not going to work, you know? So I've always looked at it from the point of view of what people have taught me.
And also, you made that film about Tony Craig, which I know would shock listeners because they figure how could a happy, joyous person make a film about someone who is a great American success story? And I know he loved the film and loves you and appreciates your work like everyone else does.
Oh, I met Tony in '88. I was over at the American Academy, and I was touring around, and he was the representative for Great Britain at the Venice Biennale. And so we hit it off because he's from Liverpool, and he was a hip character. He's still a very hip character, but he turned out to be a wonderful, big time sculptor, monumental sculptor. And I was always fascinated by that sort of artistic endeavor. You know, sculpture is a very rare commodity. And so it was perfect for me. I ended up making a couple films with him. I just finished one. And yeah, I mean, he had a show on Park Avenue last year. He had 5 sculptures on Park Avenue. They're all over 40 feet or 30 feet high. But yeah, I mean, I'm just here to learn, David. Like you are. I'm just trying to learn something new.
Another amazing film that you did, I remember they showed it at the New York Film Festival of all things, was a great documentary about Cecil Taylor, whom I knew since 1955, and I don't think he could even stand anybody having a camera if they weren't using it. And he was there with you. You spent about 2 years and made an amazing film about someone who was pretty much misunderstood. And it was just, I think, one of the best films I've ever seen about any musical person. And it wasn't the usual cliches of dope, death, and destruction, or no one understands me, whine, whine. It actually showed you how such an original, crazy, amazing, creative person thought. Not that everybody had to be like that, but to understand that there was somebody and is somebody like that. And it was just such a beautiful thing that you were able to document what Cecil did, and with so many, and the wonderful part of that film where you see him sitting at the old 55 bar listening to the violinist Billy Bang and smiling, showing that he was enjoying another terrific, creative, individual, misunderstood but very joyous musician. That was just a treat. I'll never forget seeing that.
David, we're going to show, Chris, we're going to show a very short clip from that film of Cecil. You ready, Anthony?
Uh-huh.
It's about 1:40.
It's fast here, folks. Oh, this is, I like it.
There was a club called Club Harlem on 145th Street, just east of 8th Avenue. The bandstand was that high, at least. They had an upright piano. If the stage was here, when you sat down, the chair was here. You hit at 9 o'clock in the evening. You had 15 minutes off each hour, and you worked until 4 o'clock. You got $7. If I never hear Stardust again in my life, it'll be too soon.
Well, David, you played with him. You know, this is your era. That was
We met in 1955 when I was playing with
That's
Charles
right.
Mingus. And my first film score I ever did in 1956, there was a film called uh, Echo of an Era. And there was everything was written out except for 8 bars. And I said, man, I'm going to get Cecil to play. He was just so original and such a terrific guy and so interesting. So there was 8 bars, and the saxophone player who worked with George Barrow, who was fantastic, and myself were going to take the 4 bars, improvising a piece. George said, look, man, he said, we already get to play plenty and make records. Let the kid play the 8 bars. So fortunately, I took George's advice, and the only 8 bars that weren't written out, Cecil played all the stuff I wrote out perfectly. Suddenly, all these years later, finally, the score finally came out 2 years ago after 60, whatever, 60 some years. And I was listening. I said, man, that sounds like Cecil Taylor. And you can hear him back then actually doing. And he told me at the night that we saw the film in New York, that was the first time he'd ever been in a recording studio, just doing that one little. That was the first time I'd ever been in a recording studio in New York City, summer of 1956. And it was just wonderful. Cecil was so creative and so different. And then, of course, the big thing was when he got invited to the White House when Jimmy Carter was trying to sing Salt Peanuts, and there's a picture of him and Carter. After that, he started getting some gigs. Then he worked with Baryshnikov and did a whole ballet. But he just stayed the same amazing person that he always was. And in the film, you kind of show that he didn't get jaded. And as you said about yourself and anybody else who's halfway alive, he was always searching, always learning, always looking for something new and trying to understand and appreciate whatever was happening. He was a heck of a poet, too. Just an amazing guy. And I really thank you on behalf of everybody for that film. And hopefully some of the young viewers will say, boy, we got this wizard in our neighborhood working at a dry cleaning store. I want to do a film about him. Or I want to hang out with him. Not just to learn about dry cleaning, but to learn about the art.
No, you know what was so great? What was so great about Cecil was he never ever thought anything other than to enjoy himself. It was not work to him, you know. I mean, Cecil had this wonderful joie de vivre, and I remember that one night when we're going out, and he danced to "Autumn in New York" by Miss Ella, and it was, you know, Cecil was a dancer. And
was it the one in his living room or when you're actually out? Yeah. Because in your documentary, when he danced in the living room, yeah, I love that piece so much. I watched it over and over. There's something about just his groove.
Well, he was a dancer. Well, Cecil was a dancer, but I mean, you know, we all learned so much with Cecil, but his music. I remember Art DeLugoff from the Village Gate told me one time, he said, you know, if you listen to Cecil's music, which is totally, David, how would you describe it? I mean,
individual.
What's that?
Individual.
Exactly. But Art DeLugoff said, because, you know, he had gone to Boston classical training. Art said, well, it's like classical music after you hear it for about 5 minutes. It just sort of rolls into that feeling. And I always thought about that, and I think Art was right. And Art DeLugoff was always right. I loved him, right? Dude.
You know, he was amazing. He did Edgar Varese, the great composer, had his Poème Electronique, had his American premiere, not at Carnegie Hall, at the Village Gate. And it was, and the people dug it, and it was just one. And Art appreciated. He would have programs with a comedian, a composer, an actor, and someone who was a great jazz player and a folk player, all on the same bill, and people loved it. He was just terrific in that way, like a great chef putting different ingredients together. And Lester Young told us all, he said, man, tell your story. And that's what everybody can do. And that's what it's all about. And that's what we're trained to do, anything but that. So if you're lucky enough to get some training, then you got to get off that train and get on the free transportation what they call the moccasin grapevine, get on the ESP flight, which you need no frequent flyer miles or anything, and just tune in, and you can get educated every second from everybody and anybody that crosses your path. And when you see that, then you can be a real scholar in the University of Hangoutology, which we're both ardent scholarship students of, and so is everybody else who wants to be.
Well, we've
Hey,
all
Chris.
we've
Sorry.
all about hangoutology from you, Pops. You know that.
Well, I was just fortunate enough to be with other people. And then there's another part of the equation called working hard and doing better than is expected and being able to say please and thank you. That's not being obsequious or being a hustler. That's just basic civilization 101. So in order to do that, you have to get over the narcissism and egocentric freakatissimo that's such a drag to be around. And we just recently had someone who's now going to be in the broom closet in the Museum of the Deservedly Forgotten.
Wait, we're a non-political show. Hey,
No,
Chris, can
that's-
I ask you a question, Chris, please? Sorry, Chris.
Chris, I want to get your non-political moment.
No, there's a lot of nasty ass people, and when they become visible, they become, in the Buddhistic sense, they're showing that part of ourself that's disgusting and doing us a favor by saying, well, if that's in my DNA, since we're all pretty much the same, I better cool that stuff out, because that is a drag to be around. So anybody that acts that way is doing us a favor by giving us a poster of don't be this way, or you're going to make people feel the way I make you feel. And then when you hang out with people that aren't that way, you say, man, I got something to aspire to. So I'm trying to be like Chris Felder when I grow up, if I ever.
I wanted to, first of all, Chris, you said you like meeting people, and we have Jim Canary. He's back in his seat. We'd love to introduce you to James Canary.
Hi.
Hey, Chris.
How are you?
Good. Good. I love your work.
Oh, thanks, man. I mean, I don't mean to slough it off like that, but it's okay. Thank you. My mother always told me you're supposed to say thank you and go on. That's it.
Well, yeah, David says that every week, right?
Yeah, well, David's, one time, we had an exhibition down at Robert Berman's gallery. It was called Beat. And David came down and he played with a friend of mine who was a drummer from Miami. All he came in, what would you call that rig, David? His drum kit.
He told me he had the homemade drum set that he built so he could have his band in high school, that he hadn't played it, but he could keep time. So I just watched this.
No, he had Beth. His group was Bethlehem Asylum, which was a big group in Miami. By the way, Bethlehem Asylum was right next to the Beatles records in 1967, 8, 9. But anyway, so you were there, and Robert found you a sax player. I think you should describe that opening from the musical development of it.
Well, he looked like a Jim Canary who didn't have a good philosophy of life. He had a big, long beard.
Is this the Robert Berman that I see before me?
No, this is a
sax. Is it this Robert Berman?
Set up. Yeah.
Then would you like to unmic yourself and weigh in with these guys?
And Chris said, "Oh my goodness," he said, I'm having a book party. I said, man, I want to see that new book. So I came there. There was no books right in the middle of it while the guy with the long beard was playing a 30-minute solo. The books arrived just before the party was over, just right on time. And they were ripping open the books while we were playing. And I remember I said, well, boy, it's never too late. Never too late. And you can't ever be in a rush, because it doesn't help out. But
there he is, Robert. He's unmiked. What do you have to say about all that? Oops, we can't hear you.
Unmic yourself, Berms.
He's unmiked, so it's maybe turn your sound up. Oh, now you're mic'd. There you are. Oop. And I'd like to say hi, Joyce. I'm so glad you made it. Nice to see you. What's your backdrop? What's going on there? It's is that typewriter keys?
Yeah, this is interesting. It's a bunch of typewriter keys.
Looks
that
cool.
have been repurposed into a giant sculpture that is on a wall, and it's originally from a South African artist. It's very large, like 5 feet tall and 3 feet wide. It's not in my home. It was in an art display.
And
that's amazing. It looks like the ordered world of Chris Felver. You know your ordered world stuff?
I do
Chris,
know that stuff.
You know about that stuff? It reminds me of that.
I kind of like it because it represents words, letters that kind of all weave together into strange new poems and stories and into the abstract.
It's so cool. Will you email me what that is?
Okay, I'll have to find it in my photographs. Yeah.
Thank you, love. Thank you.
Joyce, that's good to see you and see those typewriter keys. And I forgot to thank Chris Felver, speaking of saying thank you, because when I was doing the record with Lawrence Ferlinghetti, we recorded something in 1994, which I think it just finally came out. Everything does eventually. And if you're still alive, that's even better. And if not, it doesn't make any difference if it's good. Anyway, we went, and Howard Hart, wonderful poet, and Philip Lamantia, another wonderful poet, were the first people, along with Jack, to give the very first ever public jazz poetry reading in New York City in 1957. Langston Hughes told me during the Red parties in the 20s, 30s, 40s, everybody did that all the time, but they didn't call it jazz poetry, and we called it, Jack and I called it poetry, music poetry, or nothing really. We just did it all the time before we ever did it publicly and before it became a fad. Anyway, they were, as so often happens, erased from history. So I had one old poster. I put Jack Kerouac, MC, Philip Lamantia, Howard Hart, and myself playing French horn. It was the Jazz Poetry Trio. I said to Howard Hart and Philip, man, how can it be a trio when there's 4 people? And they said, well, if one person doesn't show up, we still got a trio. So that was good course in how to survival. And
hey, David, darling, David, will you move yourself so we could see your face?
Oh, okay.
Like you're turned quite at a profile.
Sorry about that. Anyway, the reason I mention it is that the last time I saw them, Chris managed to get them together, and we have a picture of each of us all those years later in San Francisco. And they both passed away since then, but that's in my book that I was reading, Offbeat Collaborating with Kerouac, and more important, now in other books, so people will know that they were actually there and did that. And the reason there's so many people that sort of get erased from history. So with Chris as a documentarian, or any of you watching have a recording or write or paint or tell a story, whatever you're doing, if you're documenting something positive and crediting someone else for what they did, that's a very good thing. And that's part of our job, to be reporters and be documentarians of others who've been meaningful. And Chris, you were so great to come and get those pictures. And most of the pictures, all of my 3 books, were written by, I wrote the books, but the pictures were taken by a young photographer named Chris Felver. And by a wonderful woman photographer who is the official, Yvette Roberts, who's the official photographer for Farm Aid. And if it hadn't been for you guys, I never would have had those pictures taken with Willie and other people. And I remember when we drove to Farm Aid, Chris, and I thought I was reading a map, which I'll never have done since. And we went from someplace in Indiana after a symphony concert, drove in your truck all the way to the wrong state. And we managed to get there just in time. And it was all kinds of security. And I said, well, you know, Chris, just come with me, man. After everybody meets you, you'll be cool. And sure enough, an hour later, everybody loved being with you. And now when I go back and play every year, they always say, where's Chris? Where's Chris? So that's a good thing, folks. If you want to be an artist, you don't have to be a nasty, whining, soured, embittered wretch in order to prove that you're important.
Hey, Chris, can you tell us the stories? You were talking about Robin Williams riding his bicycle around San Francisco.
No, around Marin County.
Marin County. What's that about?
The only places he could stop off, he loved to stop off at bicycle shops. And there was a couple, there was 2 in Sausalito, there was 1 in Mill Valley. There was one in Fairfax, and he ran his bicycle. But what was really cool was I met him in the Depot, which was a bookstore in the middle of Mill Valley one time. And I looked over at him and he looked over at me and we just went, mm-hmm. We really didn't know each other at all. Just, I wasn't going to approach him and he was cool with that and all. So finally, I had this film in the Mill Valley Film Festival. And he was there with his mother, as you know, at the director's thing and all. I said, can I make a picture? So we made this picture. He said, okay, take one. It took one and that was it. But that's the picture of Robin. He was a great dude, you know, but I mean, how can you get any funnier than Robin Williams? You know, you got to be George Carlin, or I mean, you got to be really funny to be funnier than Robin Williams, right? So.
And how'd you end up taking the picture of the director of Shaft?
Gordon Parks?
Yes.
Well, he lived at the UN Center. And it was a funny thing. I went over there, you know, everybody was open then. I photographed my generation in a certain way, or the generation before me, the people I really dug. So I went over there and he said, what should I wear? I went, well, anything you want to wear, but we ended up in his closet. And he had a turtleneck. I said, put that turtleneck on. He was smoking a pipe and everything was cool. But what a wonderful guy. I mean, look at his work. What a tremendous output of, you know, everything. The ideas that Gordon Parks took on. And so that was really, he was something. To me, you know, as a photographer, filmmaker, and that's what he was in a certain way. It was awe-inspiring and keeps me going. These kind of, like David, they keep me going. I mean, you got to have some inspiration, you know, and that's sort of how I look at photography and what I do.
How about Allen Ginsberg and your book?
Oh, we all know Allen Ginsberg. Allen Ginsberg was around the first sort of period of time when I moved to San Francisco, and I made a picture of Lawrence and Nancy Peters at the bookstore, I think in '78. And so Allen, I took the last time he came to San Francisco was '96, and I made a picture of him then. So I had known him a long time. When I moved to New York, you know, Allen kept saying, your name's at the door, which I loved, you know, to all the readings and things like that. Allen was great. Allen was great. And he was a great photographer, by the way. You know, he documented a lot of important things. And I'm really glad to have, you know, Allen was great. But Ferlinghetti's my man, you know. I mean, yeah, we did a lot of traveling together. And so.
And speaking of Ferlinghetti, Jim Canary, are you going to read a little Ferlinghetti for us today?
One you sent me, huh?
Yes. Poet,
okay.
Surgeon, artist.
Okay. Yeah, I can read that. Poetry is insurgent art. I'm signaling you through the flames. I'm signaling you through the flames. The North Pole is not where it used to be. Manifest destiny is no longer manifest. Civilization self-destructs. Nemesis is knocking at the door. What are poets for in such an age? What is the use of poetry? The state of the world calls out for poetry to save it. If you would be a poet, create works capable of answering the challenge of apocalyptic times, even if this means sounding apocalyptic. You are Whitman, you are Poe, you are Mark Twain, you are Emily Dickinson and Edna St. Vincent Millay. You are Neruda and Mayakovsky and Pasolini. You're an American or a non-American. You can conquer the conquerors with words.
Yo!
Thank you.
That was from Lawrence's one of his last books, and that was the last reading he gave at City Lights. With that poem. Yeah, I mean, Lawrence is so straightforward. It's just it's like Emily Dickinson. Lawrence is so clear that you don't need to have too much interpretation. That's sort of what, you know, the beat poetry. I went to Kennedy's inaugural and I saw Robert Frost and it made sense. And I sort of got into poetry like that. But the point is, the beats you know, everybody sort of made sense. You could understand what poetry was about. It's a beautiful understanding of the world, you know. And I always loved Gregory Corso. We all love Gregory Corso, but I mean, how are you going to beat a poem like this? I got a hunch it's going to be a cinch. Now, how are you going to beat that? I mean, you know, just a simplistic sort of situation, right? So I don't know, but yeah, Lawrence is without Lawrence, the world would be different. You know, I mean, we all know that. And David knows it better than anybody because David's known him for more years than anybody has. And so he's our national treasure, as is David, by the way, as is Mr. Amram, why we're here this evening. Woo! Amen. Amen.
Amram.
Yes.
The book that I'm reading is called Offbeat Collaborating with Kerouac, and it was about Jack Kerouac and his spirit of collaboration, which was something that everybody shared and people shared before we were born, and people are continuing to share and finding their own way of doing it and creating their own generation and their own art. And our gig, when we get older, is to try to encourage everybody else to continue to do that in their own way. And also remember what Thelonious Monk said when someone said to Mr. Monk, what's your favorite song? People thought you were nuts. You got on the cover of Time magazine. Now you're a world famous person. What's your favorite song you wrote? And he said, all of them. There was a big pause. What? Then he said, well, what do you do, Mr. Monk, if you have one you don't care for? He said, I don't put it out. There was another big pause. Then he said the punchline, I have standards. That was all he needed to say. In other words, we're not just lying around and saying, yeah, whatever, as a philosophy of life. Everybody that's doing something, busting their chops to try to do a good job, but we don't tell the world about how much we're suffering to do it. We just try to put something good out there, and hopefully that will foster creativity in others. It's just that simple. And the way we're taught stuff, it's always about the me, oink, hogatissimo, to the point where if you don't act that way, you feel that you're letting society down. And the reality is, if you're trying to do a good job and you work your can off and you do better than expected, you're just like Michelangelo when he was asked to do a touch-up job in the Sistine Chapel and do some spackling, and he spent 4 years doing the touch-up job while they were screaming at him, hey, Mike, faster, Mike, faster. He realized that they deserved, the Sistine Chapel and the world deserved more than a schlocko, crapola, slop pit until the next person came on and did the same thing for the next person that was in a big rush. So he did more than was expected, and that's what we're all supposed to do while we're here. And all those people that we admire gave us something beautiful and had standards. So you can work hard, and working hard is not a federal crime, and being gracious to others is not a federal crime, and not being a swinish, narcissistic creep is not a federal crime, because that's an overcrowded field and a non-growth industry. So go the other way. Jack and everyone else did that. And if you can't go the other way, fake it. And it'll make you feel so good. You say, man, maybe I'll try to be that way.
David, you've been faking it so long, it's real.
No, I even believe it myself. Now, if I could practice it all the time, I'd be what they refer to in the vernacular as a bad mofo.
Well, I always thought that you had a good the mofo. No, you got the mojo. It ain't the mofo. It's the mojo you got going, baby.
Right.
You know.
Well, I try to keep that happening. And sometimes that's why it's always great to see you or to see anybody that's trying to do something other than stare in the mirror.
Well, listen,
your health.
We've got somebody here who doesn't stare in the mirror. We got Robert Berman. Let him relate that evening that you played the concert for the book party beat. Berms, lay it on us.
Can you hear me now?
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Welcome, Robert.
I went off of my computer onto my phone because my computer doesn't like Zoom. Anyway, I'm glad I'm here. It was 25 years ago, which is incredible.
Wow.
That we did the beach show. Really amazing. Anyway, yeah, Chris had his book came out, All the Ephemera, and David came out, and I brought in a saxophone player, and the drummer came, and it was, you could only say it was a happening that happened at that gallery that night. And I was really, and Chris has become one of my dearest friends since then. And, you know, following his career as a photographer, as a filmmaker is extremely exciting. And we're working on a film now, which we together saved the sculpture in Santa Monica called Chain Reaction. It's now in front of, by the City Hall, and it's by Paul Conrad, and it's quite an amazing piece. So stay tuned. We hope to put that film together very soon.
Great. And
that's exciting.
I didn't recognize you. You look so young, man. I didn't realize it was so low, but I remember that was such, and what was the saxophone player's name? He was so fantastic.
I think it was Arthur.
He was great.
Yeah.
That whole night was so great.
I found him on the beach. He was you know, hustling on the beach, and he was so great and such a great soul that I brought him and played at the gallery for every opening I had, and he was amazing.
So do you ever go over to Beyond Baroque?
Of course, I go there when it was happening quite often. It's a fabulous place.
That's where I first met David. He was over there showing Pull My Daisy.
Right.
And I heard you're friends with this other crazy guy we have on named Norton Wisdom. You know this guy?
I know Norton too well. He's a hero of mine. He
Everybody.
I don't know if you know his whole history, but Norton was a lifeguard for, I guess, 35, 40 years. And he saved many people's lives. And while he was saving lives, he was painting. And he was also an incredible activist. So I've shown Norton at the gallery many times, and I consider him one of my also dear friends, and an honor to have worked with him.
Hey, Norton, do you hear us? There's an angel talking behind your shoulder. If you unmic yourself, we can hear you.
Well, it can happen.
Hi, Norton.
Norton, our brother.
Paging Norton Wisdom.
Norton, come on, man.
Norton, where are you?
The Super Bowl's over, Norton. Come on back.
I don't know, you know.
There he is.
It can happen, these sports events, but they keep going every week. This is the real deal here. You know, I mean, I know, David, you love boxing. I know that. Right?
Well, the thing I liked about most sports is that after it's over, the people have some civility and they congratulate each other. It's called sportsmanship, which is basically acting human towards another person. That's that's about as hip as you can get. And you can never get enough of that, and we don't get enough of that. So I appreciate the sports only for that. Even I didn't watch the Super Bowl at the end, but I know those guys, after killing themselves doing that, they all come out and congratulate each other. That's pretty amazing. So we can all learn a lot from that in our own conduct, especially with fellow workers or fellow anybody, fellow female and gal and guy get-togethers, whoever it is, to say please and thank you. Not a federal crime, not a character defect.
Not a sign of weakness.
No, and if you watch enough television, you assume that makes you're some kind of a nerd creep. So I say, bravo for creepdom and nerddom if that's what it's has to be defined as. I don't think it is. It's more like what you call civilization 101.
Well, I
And
think
Norman,
that's
it's great to see you because you of all the art shows I've ever been at, that was the most fun. And I can't believe it was 25 years ago. I could still see you opening up those books when the postman finally came 3 days late and delivered them, right in the nick of time. And I could still see them coming out of those big boxes. And I
Berm,
got a
it was
copy of the
only
book.
15 years ago.
No, it wasn't. Really?
207.
Is that right? You know what? I
No, as people
confused.
get older, they forget the years.
No, you know why I did it in my mind? Because it was 25 years ago when I showed William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg. That's why.
That's right. You see, it's not easy remembering. No, but to pin down a year is always a little complicated. Yeah, but that was beautiful. Anyway, David showed up. It was really a great opening. Let's face it. I mean, that was the best opening I ever had. It's we had 100 pictures on the wall, and David is playing, and Berm's in his element in his gallery, which is if you haven't been there for an opening with Mr. Berman, you must come.
I just reminded me, Chris, just to show the viewers that you're not the uptight, conservative, repressed gentleman that you seem to always be, because when you went to your big art opening in New York City, a suburb of Venice, California, New Manhattan, my son Adam came, who was then about 10 years old, and he couldn't see that well. I said, "Get on my shoulders." So you got it on his shoulders, and he said, "Adam, here's the thumbtack," and you put a picture up on top of this beautiful exhibition. And the guy who was running the show saw the star photographer, supposed to be Mr. Unapproachable, unless you say, "Give me your money," up there having a good time with this little squirt on his back. And he said to you, "Chris, who is that child on your back nailing up the photograph by the ceiling?" And you said, "That's my grandmother." And Adam never forgot that. He said now he's 37 years old and sends his love. I think he's too big to get on your shoulders, but he always appreciated your graciousness and sense of humor under fire. And I did.
Look how beautiful, what a drummer he's become, right? I mean, he's a real chip off the old block. Let's be serious. Adam Amram, something to deal with. All David's kids are something to deal with. They're all fantastic artists. I mean, let's call it the way it is.
Well, I was just lucky and still am. But that's because they got to hang out with a whole bunch of people, including people that never went to an art museum, never went to a concert, never went to anything. But when we were living on the farm, they had something to offer too, because everybody's got something to offer. So my kids were brought up with anybody and everybody, and mostly with people that had something that you could aspire to and to be with and hang out with, who were nice to kids, which most of my friends were. And now my kids are nice to kids as well as old people. And that's the way we can all be. And that's the way we all are till we get talked out of it.
Don't get talked out of it. That's the deal.
Yeah,
exactly. Fight the good fight. Fight the good fight. Well, so, I mean, what do you think, David? What are you projecting for your next 90 years?
Well, I spoke to my doctor and he said, well, be 180. I said, well, by that time, I was supposed to have written my next book, which when the first 80 years film came out, and I couldn't get the book written on time. The publisher said, look, why don't you call it the next 80 years? That'll be, you can wait till you're 160. And if you make it to that long medically. So now that I'm turned 90, I figured the new book, which I'm finally going to write, I'm working on it now, is called Amram at 90, Still a Promising Young Composer, or Notes from a Promising Young Composer. And my hope is it'll encourage people when they're 25 and they said, you're too old, you're washed up, the public don't want you, you're too old, you're 25, you're washed up. You could take that sage advice, but if they see somebody 90 still enjoying it and grateful to be able to do what you love to do, maybe they'll say, maybe I'll give it another 2 years anyway. And if that happens, then I will have made some kind of contribution. And I think that's basically what our gig is here in this lifetime. I don't know about the next lifetime. I think that's more like when it's finally time to check out of the motel, they call up and say, Ram, you got checkout time at 11:30. They got to clean up the room. Get out of here. Your time is up. So I figure when that time comes, it'll be time to check out. And I remember what a great songwriter Jerry Farris told me. The friend of his said, "Man," he said, "I've been living on the edge a lot." And he said his friend said to him, "Man, I've been living on the edge my whole life." And he said, "If you don't, you're taking up too much room."
Well, you sure don't want to do that.
No.
Keep it light, bright, and keep it moving.
That's
right?
it. Yes,
Yeah, I mean, like any band member, let's don't get caught in the wheel.
Well, I'm getting my second shot next Saturday. So when I do the Sunday show, I might be half expired, but I'll still be there. And then after that, I'm gonna be able in 2 weeks. I'll be able to actually put on my mask and go different places and go back. And I haven't even been to New York City, which is only 60 miles from here in Beacon, just last March. So I'll be able to go to different places and hang out. And then I have another book I'm writing and 2 more classical pieces and an opera and a symphony. And I'm doing a film about me and about 25 other things, plus the 15 concerts that were supposed to celebrate my 90th birthday, all of which got canceled. So when someone asked me, I said, well, Miles Davis wrote a song called So What? And the great Robert Frost, whom you mentioned, said, I'm an old man and I finally figured what life's all about is 3 words. It goes on. And Robert Burns, the great jazz poet of the 18th century, said, the best laid plans of mice and men oft go awry. So we just got to keep on trucking. And whatever it is, go down that road. And when your GPS tells you to turn off because there's an accident, don't get discouraged. There's always another way to get there. And if you don't get there, you go to someplace else, and that might even be better.
That's called improvisation, if I recall correctly.
Exactly. Improvisation is survival.
In this day and age, it was never more important. I mean, I love that everyone is now hanging out at home, working, doing their job, just like they always were when they went to the factory. So this is a real interesting time, I think we have here now. Everyone is sort of signing in on an independently productive, work schedule. I think what's happening is really incredible. I mean, I hope it's good for the arts, but it's not good for me because I can't see anybody, to make pictures. Everyone's a little nervous. I can't wait to get the third shot, 2 shots and the third one, whatever. But
Chris, are you going to read for us today from one of your books?
Sure, I'll read something that David wrote.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, this is what David wrote for Beat.
Nice.
David Amram. And this is the poster that he was talking about Howard Hart and Philip Lamantia. So there we have it right there, folks. Okay. So
it all began.
So David wrote this just a few weeks ago. We all valued the relationship of spontaneous and formality as parts of the whole. We were taught to pay attention. We learned that to be a real artist, you had to always look and listen and respect every single person you ever meet in life and to learn from them. These ideas served an unspoken rubrics we, members of the so-called Beat generation, shared in common. We were influenced by the philosophy of the painters as well as the glorious music makers of our era, all of whom were searching for a new way of expressing universal truths. We all wanted our art and what we did on everyday life to speak to others. The visual artists helped us to celebrate the rich heritage of classical European, Asian, and African art, along with the unsung measures of the New World. David Amram.
All right.
I could go on forever, but
Well, it's interesting, you know, I was with someone for 15 years and she said, you know, man, I read your high school letters you wrote. She said, you've been saying the same thing your whole life. And I said, well, then I guess I must really mean it.
Yeah, I think you've got a direction, David. You should keep up with it. You know, I mean, I understand you're just a young composer, but I think you have vision and a direction that could continue forward.
Well, I used to tell my kids when I'm 90, if I don't hit it, I'll go to dental school. But now that I'm 90, and I didn't want to insult dentists because, man, they, unlike improvising, if they make the wrong move, they can't go, oh, I'm sorry about that. I mean to pull that tooth out. You know, you got to be like Yasha Heifetz. You got to be perfect. So since I have really respect for what dentists do, that's hard. I figure I'll have to do something else. But rather than that, I think it's good to stay on the same track. And if it's difficult, you just got to remember that desperation can be very stimulating, and you're only as old as you make other people feel. And when it's checkout time, someone else is glad to get in the room. So dig it while you're here.
I like that you use the word dig constantly, Pops. You know, it's a very good word, you know. I remember I asked Howard Hart. I went over to see Larry Rivers once. I made this picture and I said, you know, I really didn't know Larry. He said, well, what'd you say? I said, man, I dig your work. And Howard said, that's exactly what you're supposed to say to him. You know, it's all work in progress still, right? I mean, this is where we stand.
And Robert, I just want to say it's a treat to see you again. And I know you still have your museum or your museum, your gallery.
I do.
That's good.
Well, David, I mean, there's a few of us online, and we just heard that you missed your 90th birthday bashes. So I want to be the first to wish you a very happy birthday, 90th birthday.
Oh, well, bless you. Thank you. And I'd like to return it with a boat inside of a bottle. Someone said, what's it like writing a symphony? I said, like the guy who put that boat in the bottle. And since I can't drink out of the bottle, I just want to thank you on behalf of my main man who was able to make it here tonight, Franz Schubert. So between Franz Schubert and myself and the boat in the bottle, l'chaim.
L'chaim.
You two guys are too much, let's face it. I mean, you know, I wouldn't be anywhere without either one of you. So, l'chaim to all of you.
L'chaim. Did we ever find Norton? Did Norton disappear?
He's there, he's painting.
Yeah, right. He's working. He's always working. But I love that Norton was a lifeguard. Isn't that fantastic? Oh. I mean, that's like his work has got that, you know, organic viscosity to it where you can actually see through it. It's like perfect. That's what he did, was work at the water. It's perfect.
You give the definition of a visual artist, and it is Norton Wisdom. He sticks with it and paints every day, and he doesn't stop. He's amazing. He's sharing a studio with his daughter downtown right now. Incredible.
He's unbelievable. What's unbelievable is he does it and then he pulls it off and erases it.
I know. It's incredible. It's like Buddhist, like the sand mandalas.
No, he's too much. He's even though he can't find us right now, but we're with him all the way. He's our man.
Listen, gentlemen, I'll get it right one day, then I won't erase it. But until then, you know what I mean? The last thing we need is another wisdom floating around on somebody's wall. But I'd like to say that it's a pleasure to walk in your shadows, you guys. It's a real honor, and I can't tell you how much I'm enjoying this. And Robert, and I don't know if everybody knows, Robert Berman's probably been one of the most important dealers and shown everyone of who has created the culture in Southern California. They've all gone through Robert Berman's gallery, and it's everything he's shown should actually, it's like having a private, it's like having a gallery, which is truly a museum representing the heartbeat of Los Angeles. So if you don't know Robert Berman, turn over that rock.
Norton, you're the best.
You are the best, Norton.
It's been a great, and with you too, Chris, meeting you through Robert was a, that's how it happens with Robert. Everybody that I meet there is important and relevant to the journey we're all on. So enough said. I hate everything I've said. And so I'm going to crawl back under my little rock and erase something important.
Well, we have to say one thing. There's nothing like a Berman opening. Let's be serious.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been to a lot of openings in my day, but my favorites are with the Bermans, period,
Well, everybody in LA County owes me 2 glasses of wine.
I owe you at least 8.
I see.
I've been to many of your openings.
Thank you.
Hey, did Philippe Calange shoot at your gallery recently? Was that?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Okay. And Andy Moses showed there, correct?
I've been friends and shown Andy a few times. Yes. Yes. Andy's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
David, what is the what are you working on right now? I mean, you just composed something for Harvard, right? What was it exactly?
It's called Global Suite for Winds, Brass, and Percussion. And since I couldn't get into Harvard in 1948 when I applied, I was thrilled that they would ask me to write a piece. And we did the first movement because that was pretty simple. And then I said, just as a tryout, and I said, boy, this is the high IQ orchestra, because everybody in there was going to be a lawyer, a doctor, or a statesman. They had one music major, and they could all play up a storm. It was so much fun. And then, so it's called Global Suite, and the first movement's sort of like an old European, early American march. The second movement is based on a wonderful folk song that I play on this instrument. Speaking of putting things together, when I went to the Beat Meets East, oy vey, not my title, scarcely, festival in Chengdu, China, and I heard accompanied people reading Jack Kerouac from Bangkok, reading in Japanese and Chinese and all other languages and English. And I heard the instrument, and then I thought about that song, The Wayfaring Stranger. So I thought, boy, I always loved that. And somehow that instrument, I said, I've got to use that someday for a piece. And sure enough, I was at Harvard and they were playing the first movement. Up on the wall, I saw a picture of Pete Seeger because he had been at Harvard. I said, holy cow, he was only there a year. And then he dropped out of Harvard so he could continue his education with Woody Guthrie, riding around on trains, got into the world, never was the same, and made America a much better place with all the beautiful music that he created from around the world. So I thought, I'm going to use that song. So the second movement uses a great old Appalachian song that came from England, Ireland, Scotland, and was used in African-American churches. It's like a universal song. Well, it's played by the baritone horn, not by me, not on that. And then the third movement is based on music from India, Pakistan that I learned a long time ago. It's some of which are used in a ballet I wrote called Chakra. So each movement has a different culture. Everything's written out. And again, it was from the University of Hangoutology and not planning, but when something touched my heart saying, I'm going to put that in the hopper. and someday going to make a nutritious stew out of that. And I think that composing is very much like cooking, where you take whatever is in the icebox and make some delicious one-time only meal, the way Norton makes those paintings on the spot. And while it's good to follow a recipe, and that's certainly wisdom, we can have Bach and Beethoven, Schubert, and Mozart for our recipe rather than let's all slop it into the gruel pot slopatissimo style. I'm not an avant-garde chef or an avant-garde composer.
What about your omelets, Davy? You slop it all in your omelets.
Well, that was one of the ones that both of us were, you might say, in an altered state of consciousness when Charlie Parker came to my basement apartment in 1952. And he said, when he saw the room full of vipers all looking because they wanted to meet him, even though they couldn't stand me, he said, "What you got to scoff?" Meaning, what do you have to eat? So I went and I opened up the ice box and I took out borscht, sour cream, marmalade, some eggs, borscht, and everything else I could possibly put in, and made a crazy omelet out of it. And unbeknownst to me, we both enjoyed it because we were both so hungry. Then we had 5 hot dogs on the way back afterwards. But after we were done hanging out about 4 in the morning. However, I realized that while the omelet, and I mentioned that just not self-deprecating, but just to show what you do when you're desperate and in an altered state, and that's the best you can do. People paid so much attention, I realized I could have become an avant-garde. I could have written an avant-garde cookbook, or I could write music of the El Slopatissimo, whatever. But there was something even better, which was to try to emulate those great recipes and those great dishes and the great times made by other people from other cultures and see whatever you got in the icebox that might be more harmonious. So ever since then, I've been searching to try to put things together in a better way. And once you have those high ideals, then you can find a way to put them into practice. But the best things come as a surprise. And that's why I never forgot being at Robert Berman's gallery, 2008. Now, I thought when you said 25 years ago, I said, wow, my short-term memory lapse must be extending into nothingness.
Obviously, it's mine.
Oh, no. But it was something that I always remembered. I could still visualize it. It was so beautiful. So that could be part of a recipe for me. Just I could still see that wonderful guy playing the saxophone with the beard, and the guy with his drum that he made. He had that little pedal, and you cutting open the books, and everybody having a good time. And Chris's beautiful book. So sometimes anything that's positive is worth keeping and storing, and then it gives you something that you can draw upon years later. So if you can take your remaining brain cells and not destroy them, it's amazing what your memory and your experiences can do. And then you can make something creative and no one will have to know the difference. People ask me with the Manchurian Candidate, how did you write all that scary music when the guy was going nuts? I said, man, that's the easiest thing I had to do in my life. I just took everything I felt was wrong and put it together. And it was just right for someone who was freaking out. That's what John Frankenheimer wanted, to have everybody feel they were taking, drugs and stoned out of their head, being brainwashed. But when I had to write the main theme, which is simple and kind of beautiful, that took about a week of killing myself to get every note right, so it would sound effortless, but not be a copying of Three Blind Mice or Schubert or Brahms, but something original. And I think it's that way for everything. And I always admire Chris, the way you could take a picture. Somebody will come and you say, hold on, baby, hold on, man. That's good, all right. Now turn left. Okay, Professor, one more time. We got to be, that's it. Goodbye. You managed to make it fun and look effortless. But at the same time, when I checked you out, I saw you were studying and looking and seeing ahead of what it is. And I know Norton does that when he paints too. He sends that stuff. I say, my God, man, was that good? He's able to see a little ahead and do it at the moment. And that's the key. And also trying to be honest. That doesn't hurt either.
That's perfect, Pops. That's perfect.
And that's what Jack did when he wrote. He was a wonderful reporter and a visualizer, as well as being a wonderful writer and extremely well read. So he wasn't what they described in the critics as a slob with a typewriter that could type fast. And Neil Cassidy was not a stoned out car thief. They were two brilliant guys. And we were lucky to know them, and the world's lucky to have them as a figure in a wonderful book. And Jack wrote about 30 some other books, and they're terrific too. And all of you watching, including Joyce, who I know is out there in the state of Washington, who I met in 1970 when I was out of college. And Joyce is great. Joyce Glasgow could come every week and watch what we're doing. And all other friends who might not have gotten on the old Zoom, we're glad you're here. And we hope that this program will make you do what you got to do. And I'm glad you can get to see Chris Felver and Robert Berman in person. I haven't seen him since that show. And James Canary, who's on every week, and Norton Wisdom, and Pamela Dickerson, and Anthony Demarbiex, because they're all terrific people. And that's the joy of doing this program.
Like they say, thank you for coming.
So
thank you, Chris, thank you, Jim Canary. So good to see you, Norton. Thank you, Anthony, David, Robert Berman. Good to see you. I miss going to the gallery for sure.
We'll open soon.
Good.
Goodbye, folks, and we'll see